Major phone carriers make you sign contracts with rigid data plans to trap you into a kind of forced phonogamy. Sounds pretty insecure if you ask me. At Consumer Cellular, we believe in a more consensual and healthy form of phonogamy, free of contracts and more flexible to your data needs. This way, you stick around not because we force you to with contracts and fees, but because you love our phone plans. Like ardently love our phone plans. Phonogamously. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the podcast that follows the money behind our beautiful game. I'm Kevin Day, and he is football finance expert at Liverpool University, Kieran Maguire. Hello, Kieran, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you, Kevin. Rocking and rolling as always.
As always, yes. Now I'm going to let the listeners into a little secret here, Kieran, because we're recording in a new, more efficient way, but it means we can't see each other, which I'm slightly worried about, as I'm just hoping you're not naked as well.
No, as I'm in the front window, and I'm not in Amsterdam, I'm therefore fully clothed.
So obviously it's a Monday, so it's our questions pod today. We have some very good questions, but some big news to start, Kieran. Obviously, I think it's put the start of a smile on our face at least. We may be staying home, but football's coming home. So the Premier League has announced a date for its return, and it looks like it's all systems go.
Yes, it is. And I was getting a little bit meh about the return of football, but as soon as they actually announced the dates and the fact that I think on Saturday we've got 4 games and on Sunday we've got 3 games, I was like a kid on Christmas Eve night. You know, it was genuine giddiness. So yes, it's good news. I think it's good news for people that want to see some Premier League football live, free to air, because they're going to get that for the first time ever as well. So it's a bonus. All 92 matches are going to be screened. I think the only slight complication I see is on the last day of the season. As always, the matches have to take place simultaneously to prevent any sort of artificial results taking place. So how they'll deal with that, I'll leave down to the broadcasters. But I think that's the only particular issue. But yeah, ultimately, this is a money show, and sadly, the money squabbles have started
already.
Yes, because it looks as if the Premier League were in fear of having to give a rebate to the TV companies of around about £750 million. Now, my understanding is that is going to be reduced to around about 330 million. So, that's a step forwards, but the squabble is who's going to pay how much. Now, the big 6 clubs, we know who the big 6 are. From the start of this season, they get a greater proportion of the money, which is distributed because they've changed the formula as to how money should be divvied up between the clubs. So therefore, if you're on TV more, if you finish higher up the table, you will get more money. But by all accounts, especially Spurs and Liverpool, they're saying, well, if there's a rebate, it ought to be split equally 20 ways, which does seem a bit harsh.
Talking of the broadcasters and the money, Kieran, how does it work? Because we see now that BBC have got some games, Amazon Prime are showing some games. Will they have made their own deal with Sky and BT, or this is a deal they've done with the Premier League? Are they buying the games from the Premier League or from Sky? And how will they divvy up? I mean, I presume the BBC will be watching Burnley versus Bournemouth on the BBC rather than Liverpool Man United, I'm guessing.
Well, I have heard stories that apparently Everton versus Liverpool might be on the BBC because it would reduce the number of people potentially who will go outside the stadium. And this is one of the things the authorities are concerned about. Remember, we are still viewed by the establishment as being the great unwashed, can't be trusted, and therefore will be up to no good outside the grounds. So therefore, by having it on the BBC, it will allow more people, because not everybody, of course, has got a satellite box, not everybody has got a smart TV. So it'll be interesting to see how that one particularly develops. But in terms of the negotiations, I was surprised that Amazon have been given more matches simply because they bought two groups of games which were due to take place around about Christmas, early December and Boxing Day, and effectively that was them out. So I think they've got a sort of a bonus just for the Premier League, saying, well, next season we might struggle to deliver matches in front of crowds. The BBC's been given 4 games because they've not been able to broadcast Match of the Day over the course of the last 2 months, so therefore that's had an impact upon their scheduling. So it seems to be a fairly equitable distribution of the remaining 92 games. Sky and BT already had 47 of them, and they are going to pick up the vast majority of the remainder.
I have to say, Match of the Day has been better without football. It's been really good. It's great the football's coming home. Obviously, horse racing is also coming back just in time for Ascot. How's your luck, Your Majesty? Tennis and fishing were the first sports to be allowed. Polo and croquet very much allowed. So I think we're lucky to have a government where we're all in it together, Kieran, aren't we? Basically.
Yeah. Well, the snooker's coming back as well. So.
Oh, that's good. That's nice.
I do enjoy a bit of snooker.
You could really genuinely show repeats from 1999. I wouldn't be able to tell you whether I'm watching. Anyway, as it is Monday, so it is questions, and got quite a few people have asked the first question. Mark Aegis, hello Mark, how are you? Miss you, love to the family. Lee Ayres, can't wait to see you in the Parsons. Richard Foster, keep up the good work. Julian Chenery, my theatrical chum. As you might gather, these are all fans of the oldest football club in the league, Crystal Palace. They've all asked, along with many other Palace fans, for your views on the release of Palace's accounts. I think we were the penultimate club. You got yourself into your usual Twitter spat with Newcastle fans following the release of their accounts. So is there anything to pick out in Palace's accounts? One thing I did notice, because you sent them to me, which I thought was very optimistic of you. I did get some way in, but then I got distracted by the cat. Only 6.8% of our income comes from match day, and that seems low even by some of the figures you've been talking about with other Premier League clubs. Traditionally, you use Bournemouth as the example of the low match day income, but that seems low to me. Am I right to think that?
It is, but it's a function of two things. Selhurst Park has got a capacity of 25,500.
Yeah.
That is, I think, is the 4th lowest in the Premier League. It's also, if you take a look at the demographic profile of the Palace support base, you're not going to be having a lot of the prawn sandwich brigade, so therefore the majority of the tickets are being sold to season ticket holders, and season tickets at most clubs work out as a pretty reasonable price, and it's the same as Palace, and walk-ups. The reason why some clubs have a greater proportion of money coming through match day is simply because they have a much bigger hospitality portfolio where they're able to charge premium prices. If you take a look at Bayern Munich, for example, they make as much money from the 5,000 hospitality boxes. In fact, they make slightly more than from the other 60,000 people that go to matches on a regular basis. Now, in terms of Palace going forwards, if the new stadium expansion is approved, I think they're aiming to sell another 3,000 hospitality tickets within that, which should increase that 6.8% considerably. Should move up the scale a wee bit. The majority of the clubs in the Premier League, they get 75% or more of their income through TV. So Palace are not alone. It's not a negative, because it shows that the club is actually selling prices at levels which are accessible to the fan base.
Yeah, we'll be talking more about season tickets later. My understanding is that when the new stand is built, and there are minor issues to be dealt with, but the approval has been given in principle. When the new stand is built, all the hospitality will be in that one stand, basically, rather than sort of spread out around 2.5 stands as it is at the moment. But in general, looking at I think your summary basically was mid-table accounts, mid-table club, basically, wasn't it?
Yes, I think. Palace are now established in the Premier League. They've been there for now 7 seasons.
Whoa! Hang on, that sound is me touching wood.
But there were a couple of unusual things. I mean, effectively, last year, Palace lost £100,000 a day for 364 days of the year. And on the 365th day, they sold Aaron Wan-Bissaka, which wiped out all of those losses. So it was really important, and I think Steve Parish said this in the strategic report, it was actually important to make that sale. And it was one of those strange sales. They sold the player, but they didn't receive any cash at the time. United are paying via IOUs. But again, I've said to you, I think on quite a few occasions, the majority of the clubs are losing money on a day-to-day basis in the Premier League, and they're reliant on either player sales or owner bailouts to make ends meet. And Palace are no different or better or worse, I think, than those clubs.
Okay, right, on to question number 2. And it's from Simon Colebrook. Now, Simon is chair of the Pompey Supporters Trust, which is a very responsible job. Well done, Simon. Simon's been thinking about the health of football clubs, and he has rather a radical question, I think. Simon's question is it time to scrap the football creditors rule? Because it seems to Simon that salary caps, financial fair play, etc., all fall down because of it, and it protects the football bubble from its duties to the real world. So, firstly, for new listeners, maybe could you briefly explain what the football creditors rule is? And do you agree with Simon? Because I know it's an issue that does come up fairly regularly, but I've never heard someone suggest that we scrap it completely. Certainly not somebody from within football.
Well, yeah, it's an intriguing issue, this, and again, I'm indebted to my good friends at Law in Sport for allowing me to go chapter and verse into this. If a football club goes into administration or a CVA and it comes out of it the other side, it has to pay the football creditors 100% of what they're owed. So who are football creditors? It's other clubs, it's the Premier League or the EFL itself, and it's full-time employees. And that's quite important, full-time employees. So clearly that would include all of the players. If you're a part-time cleaner at a football club on minimum wage, tough. But if you're a full-time member of staff, now, does that have benefits? Well, clearly it does have benefits to the rest of the football industry. But of course, it means that if a club goes into administration, the way that administration works is that the administrator sells the club and he uses that money to effectively divvy out to other people. If more money is going to football creditors, by definition, there is less money left over to pay other people, including HMRC. And one of the common features we see of clubs going into administration is that they've not paid their tax bills, they've not paid their PAYE, their national insurance, their VAT for a while. And it does mean that less money is going into government coffers. HMRC, they did appeal this in 2012, and they lost the case. They tried to say that the football creditor rule was in fact illegal. It was giving an unlawful advantage to the football industry, but the judge ruled against that. And now the government has come back, and we've just got new legislation from the 1st of April 2020, which will give HMRC an advantage. But again, if you're that part-time cleaner of a football club, unfortunately, you're still at the bottom of the pile. Should it be scrapped? I think there is a case for saying that, because it does make it more difficult if you are buying a football club. So if you've got a football club which is in a complete mess and you're thinking of buying it, you're saying, well, how do I work out the right price to pay? The first thing you've got to say, I've got to pay the Premier League, I've got to pay the EFL, I've got to pay such and such club for outstanding transfer fees, and I've got to pay the players as well for their outstanding wages. That could act as a disincentive, because by the time you work out that particular cost, it could be that the price of the club is now looking too high.
Well, two things briefly in response to that, Kieran. First of all, my understanding is that the football creditors rule was in place to prevent a domino effect. In other words, if a club goes out of business and it owes Club X, Club Y and Club Z £30 million each in outstanding transfer fees, then Club X, Y, Z are in big trouble themselves. And secondly, why has football been allowed to make its own? I mean, I presume if you own a steel manufacturing plant, the rest of the steel industry wouldn't be able to say, right, well, here's our rule. If one of us goes bust, we have to pay each other before we pay HMRC. Would that be the case?
Yeah, I mean, this is why HMRC appealed along that very viewpoint that it was an industry-specific rule invented to protect football, but it meant that HMRC and other creditors were being disadvantaged. The judge ruled at the time, and I've not got the case law in front of me, that he felt it was part of the benefits outweighed the costs, in effect. And therefore it should proceed because of the importance of football, but also to prevent this potential domino effect, because so much trading takes place between football clubs and other football clubs. Whereas if you compare to the steel industry, Tata Steel isn't dealing with German steel companies. They're in competition with each other, whereas football clubs, because they're in a league, they are actually sort of complements rather than substitutes for each other as far as the industry is concerned.
Okay, thank you. Our next question comes from Alex Shields. Hello, Alex. Now, Alex says, I was surprised. Alex, you're lucky. 6 months with Kieran, I've lost the ability to be surprised. So I envy you somewhat. But Alex was surprised to read that in 1819, that's 2018-19, not 1819, Chelsea made a huge operating loss, and Roman Abramovich put £268 million in loans into the club as part of their £1.4 billion debt. He says, Alex's question is, what's in it for Abramovich? And secondly, if he asks for that back, will the club implode? And I would add to that, how did Chelsea lose so much in that particular season, 18-19?
Okay. I think Alex is in fact the Reverend Alex Shields. So he's very keen on the show. Yes, it's a very compliment. So yes. Clearly we're recording this on a Sunday morning, so I suspect Alex will be busy virtually talking to his boss and talking to his parishioners and so on.
I think you'll find he talks to his boss virtually all the time.
True.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking to his ultimate boss, then that's pretty much the only way the Reverend Alec will be talking to his other boss. If he's talking about the Archbishop, then of course that probably will be virtually, although from tomorrow they can have a barbecue. Good morning. I like Alec. I didn't put two and two together. I do apologise. Well, he's not a proper Catholic priest, is he? So let's not be that respectful. But yeah.
Right.
I'm just channeling the spirit of my mother there when we got married in the Methodist church. As my mum walked in very loudly, she said, "This is not a church; it's a scout hut."
Well, funnily enough, yeah, I've got an Irish Catholic mother, and she didn't turn up to mine. So, or rather, she wasn't turning up to my wedding until about 24 hours beforehand.
Well, let's not open that can of worms about your relationship. Never mind, in case the Baroness is listening. Anyway, sorry, Alex. This is all a bit of a diversion. We're big fans of your work as well, Alex.
So what's in it for Roman Abramovich? First of all, he gets high profile. And if you're a high-profile oligarch, that increases your chances of not being poisoned, which is always useful.
Fair enough. That's a view, yeah.
So what happened was Roman Abramovich bought Chelsea Football Club for £140 million. As Alex has rightly said, he's put in around about 10 times that over the course of the years. If he's made no money from it, he could make money, however, if he sells it, because the asking price is between £2 to £3 million, and Britain's second richest man is a billion. Yeah. So, but by all accounts, that's the asking price. And Jim Ratcliffe, who's the head of Ineos, who runs one of the big cycling organisations in the Tour de France and so on. He was interested in buying the club, but he felt the price was too high. And part of the issue with Chelsea is to do with the pitch. Now, this is probably something I've never said before, and I suspect I'll never say again. You've got to give a lot of credit here to Ken Bates. And yeah, I know. Yeah, you don't see people saying... Chelsea was you go back to the 80s and the 90s, Chelsea was owned by property developers, And clearly, given the location of the ground, you can see the benefits of knocking down the ground and turning it into something extremely expensive and extremely profitable for the developers. Ken Bates came in and he set up something called Chelsea Pitch Owners. And Chelsea Pitch Owners, it's literally it's owning shares in the pitch, and 21,000 shares exist, but no one person can own more than 100 shares. So this means for the stadium to be sold is actually very difficult. You've got to get 75% approval of 21,000 people, many of whom, of course, are diehard Chelsea fans. And Chelsea Pitch Owners, as well as owning the stadium, also own the name Chelsea Football Club. So if anybody wants to take over Chelsea, you can buy the club, you can buy Chelsea FC PLC, but you don't get approval to use the name unless you put together a presentation to the pitch owners, which, when we've spoken before about, are there ways in which we can have increased fan involvement? Chelsea, which you would associate, with one person, is actually from a sort of historical point of view, is protected in a way that very few other clubs are. So Chelsea...
Sorry, Kieran, can I just interrupt, Kieran? I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah. It's hard because I can't see you off. Normally, you can tell the glint in my eye when I'm about to interrupt. But I'm so reluctant, even now, to give Ken Bates credit. Now, I just feel like I want to check, was this actually a far-sighted policy on his part? Or at the time, was it a way of making money in the short term?
No, I honestly think that at the time it was to protect the club from potentially being taken over by somebody else, and Chelsea fans losing their club at Stamford Bridge and being effectively evicted to somewhere on the outskirts of London, to some sort of identikit plastic stadium which could have been created. So, this is certainly my perception of it. And I was reading up on the Chelsea Pitch Owners. Ken Bates probably, he's not Father Christmas when it comes to most football issues, but I think here he's actually done the right thing. He's quite a spiky character, as we know, but I think he has done it. So this does mean that if Roman Abramovich sells Chelsea FC PLC, which is the name of the club, they don't get the pitch as such. They get to rent the pitch from Chelsea Pitch Owners, and it's £1 a year. So it's the cost isn't an issue. But if they want to move to Battersea Park Power Station or wherever it's got to be, they would have to get the approval of 75% of these individual shareholders. And he's tried once before. He tried in 2011, and he didn't get that approval. So it's an unusual thing. But what does he get out of it? I just think he gets the kudos of owning a globally known football club, which that kudos you don't get from owning the world's second largest yacht, which he's owned. When I used to teach in Barbados, he had it moored in the local docks, and it was gobsmackingly huge.
Mm. Yes, Jamie Redknapp's been on it. He gave me a guided tour of the bits he could remember. It didn't take long. The final part of the question then, which was my part, why was Chelsea's loss so much bigger in season 18-19 than other seasons?
Well, the reason being is that they were not in the Champions League. And
right. Okay.
If you recall that they made it to the Europa League, they had a new manager and they backed the manager. They spent £250 million on players. But if you can remember the names of any of those players, you're better than I. I think it's fair to say that they haven't been a universal success. But certainly the manager was backed, and Abramovich said, if I'm going to recruit a new manager, the first thing I'm going to do is to effectively give him an open checkbook. But it didn't. Well, it worked out. They got into a Champions League place, I think, last season, and they won the Europa League. So it was a reasonable season by their standards.
Okay, now our next question comes from Martin Halliday. I like the sound of Martin Halliday because I think reading between the lines is a slight air of the curmudgeon. in Martin. Martin is a Liverpool fan. He's a Cop season ticket holder. He pays £735 for that privilege. He says in brackets that doesn't seem a lot of money now, but back in the glory days of Roy Hodgson, and he's put glory days in inverted commas, so we know that it doesn't mean it. I'll point out, Martin, that for some clubs, Roy Hodgson is the glory days. And Martin says, this is a bit I like. Martin says, I arrive as the teams come out, and I've gone long before they're in the shower. I occasionally buy a half-time pint. I never buy merchandise. That's the spirit, Martin. You enjoy yourself when you go to the game, mate. But Martin's question is a good point, actually, because I'm sure a lot of people have asked themselves this. Where does Martin's £735 actually, or what does Martin's £735 actually do for the club? And he says, considering there are a lot more, as he puts it, mugs than me with more money, how efficient a pricing model are season tickets? I mean, in other words, would it be easier to or more financially beneficial to sell each ticket for the game on a day-to-day basis?
Well, actually, I think he raises a very valid point, and a point which, to a large extent, Liverpool do take advantage of themselves. Liverpool have the smallest proportion of season tickets out of compared to capacity of any club in the Premier League, and as Martin points out, they've got 27,000.
Wow.
Okay. We've got 24,000 at Brighton. Wow. So it's crazy. Palace must have close to 20,000 themselves.
Yeah, 18,000. Yeah.
Yeah, so because you've got to set aside normally 3,000 for away fans, and of course you do want some walk-up fans as well, just to be able to offer people an experience they've not had before, or for fans who are coming from overseas and so on. But Liverpool's strategy is to have relatively low numbers of season tickets, and the rest are available to members. And you pay 25 or £35 for your membership. And then twice a year, tickets go on sale, and there's this almighty bun fight where people are fighting to be, 17,000th in the queue, and you have to wait for ages before you get. It's a bit like Glastonbury, except at least with Glastonbury, you don't have to pay for the privilege of being in the queue. So that's what you get from your membership. It's the privilege of being in the queue, and then you fight out for the tickets. So Liverpool make a lot of money from this particular strategy. In terms of the overall season ticket strategy, I think to a large extent it depends upon the club and where you are in the league and in which division you are in. If you are in Leagues 1 or 2, you're paying for 23 home games. There's going to be some days where it's a Tuesday night, the weather's appalling, and you're playing Scunthorpe or Southend or wherever it's when it doesn't particularly appeal and you don't fancy going. Now, if everybody took that approach, could you see matches could be taking place in front of hundreds rather than thousands of fans if it was purely down to walk up? So what clubs benefit from in terms of season tickets is they can be pretty certain that they know in advance what the attendance is going to be. But also, of course, for the majority of clubs, you are paying for your season ticket in advance.
Yeah.
So therefore, because you're paying for it, March, April, May, whatever it's going to be, that gives the club cash to pay the wages bills for June and July when they've got no other money coming in. Yeah. So it's from a cash flow point of view, and I get very giddy about cash flow.
Indeed.
It has a logic to it in having a season ticket strategy from a maximising cash point of view, especially if you are a big club like Liverpool or Manchester United or Chelsea, whoever it's going to be. They could make more money by selling every match at Anfield or Old Trafford on an individual ticket basis, because they've got the fan bases who are prepared to do that.
Yeah, and of course the season ticket thing explains why you quite often see a game in the middle of February which is officially sold out, but you're there and there are huge blocks of people missing, their season ticket holders who haven't turned up, but they count as being there, don't they? And there's the one thing that really annoys me about season tickets with big clubs, and I'm afraid Palace tried to enforce it, but couldn't really, is those nights when you can't turn up for a game, and especially midweek games when kids have got season tickets, when you can't just give them to a mate. You're expected to sell them back to the club, and the club will sell the ticket on. And of course, they make more money, but it doesn't happen often enough for the club to turn a blind eye. But that's a question for another pod. Mark Ridley has set us a challenge here, Kieran. Mark Ridley has challenged us to see whether we can make a question about insurance interesting. Mark, at first glance, no, we can't. Basically, I had a quick look before while Mrs. Day is working out all the technical issues for me and flirting with Kieran on an outrageous basis. I have a look at the script to see if I can maybe insert something funny. I think I could be here all day. Bear in mind, I'm a professional comedy writer. But basically, Mark, it's an interesting question, but it's not. It's not actually. It's a question. I'm sure you'll make the answer interesting. But basically, using Harry Kane's leg injury as an example, Mark wants to know, will the club be paying Harry Kane's wages or the insurance company? How much does a policy cost? And will players have their own individual policy, i.e. within the club? Will the club have one separate policy for each player or a massive policy for the whole club? And do players take out their own insurance?
Right, if we sort of look at those separately, there is a Premier League global policy, but I spoke to somebody at a club just to do a bit of research on this, and I think it's a limited payout if a player does get injured and has to retire early, and that payout is actually quite low. That's to
the player, that payout, not to the club.
That would be to the club.
Oh, to the club. Okay,
yeah.
Right.
So if you think about it, because it was a Premier League employee that I spoke to about this, in terms of policies, there are policies available, but the premiums are very, very high. Because if you think about it, if you lost Harry Kane and the premium was through injury, which, and a lot of players do retire through injury each year. His market value presently probably in the region of 150 to 200 million. Can you see that the premium on that, we are talking millions of pounds? So therefore, what I was told is that the clubs effectively self-insure. They take the view that if we've got a squad of 25 players, we're probably going to lose one every 2 seasons through premature injury. How much is that going to cost us? What would be the cost of the premiums over the 2 years? Actually, it's cheaper just to keep your fingers crossed and hope that it's going to be a player who isn't Harry Kane that's subject to this. So there are some clubs that go down the insurance route, but the majority choose not to do so, simply because they've costed it out and they feel that the premiums being levied are too expensive. It's a bit like if you buy a television and they always trying to get you to have an extended warranty for a ridiculous sum of money. It's simply that they're overpriced, the premiums, and as a consequence to that, most clubs take the view that they'd rather reinvest the money instead on better training facilities, better physio facilities, which will reduce the chances of players getting injured in the first place.
Well, I mean, that's all very well. I mean, there's a certain cynicism in that club's approach, really, because Harry Kane, I imagine, is financially protected. I mean, but if you're looking at a player in the Championship or a League One club, will they have their own insurance policies in, or have the days long gone when a player gets injured and uses his insurance to buy a pub? So what happens to a player who suddenly finds himself out the go? Well, I know jockeys. That I was once told by an insurance company that the people that are hardest to insure are jockeys and comedians. Jockeys because of the nature of their job, and comedians because of the irresponsible nature of their lifestyle. But it seems to, and because they're spending a lot of time in cars with the lifestyle. But that does seem. I mean, that seems unfortunate. And if they're keeping their fingers crossed, and you're the player who unfortunately walks under the ladder and gets hurt, that seems a bit unfair, doesn't it? What happened? Where's the recourse for a player like that?
Well, I mean, the players can take out insurance policies themselves. I think that there is some support from the PFA, but also the clubs would probably be obliged to pay up their contracts, so that there will be some financial protection as far as the player is concerned, and that's written into a contract. That there is an issue if you're a League One or League Two player, because as we've discussed at length before, they're normally all on 1 or 2 year contracts, so the amount of the payout could be quite low. But if you are one of those players, the chances are you don't have a lot of spare money around. And because of the precarious nature of the industry, from an individual's perspective, the premiums would be high to effectively give you a sort of, it's not life insurance as such, but it's critical injury insurance. If you take a look at those, because I took a look at those when my kids were born, and I think if anything happens to me over the next few years, what could be when I costed it out? It was just ridiculous. So for a footballer where you've not just got the potential issues of getting traditional diseases, cancer, lung disease, things of that nature, which could tail your career, because it's a physical career. It's a physical job where there are tackles taking place all the time. It's simply not worth it from an individual player's perspective, unless they are very, very risk averse and they're prepared to pay the high amounts involved.
Yeah, I can reassure nothing's going to happen to you, Kieran. Not unless you go back to Moscow, of course. But if you stay away from there, you should be fine insurance-wise. Alex Gerrard, who I'm now paranoid that I know Alex Gerrard. Now you say we know Alex Shields. Somehow, psychologically, I feel I know Alex Gerrard. Alex's question is, season 2021, it could be business as usual, it could be behind closed doors, or it could be, as Alex says, in a biodome in the New Forest. If it's options B or C, and I like option C, the Centre Park season,
yes.
What will happen to season ticket? I mean, that's a fair question. I know, as Palace fans, we've been talking about this. Will clubs be starting to look for season ticket money for next season, or can they simply not do that? I know there's been a lot of issues around refunds. Some fans think they've been pressured into not taking the refund and to giving it back to the club in some way or form or other, to the academy or to the foundation of whichever club it is. But so presumably football clubs can't even begin to plan for the season tickets, and which is off the back of what you told us earlier about how important it is for their cash flow. Could be another problem, couldn't it?
Well, I think you'll find the majority of the clubs were selling season tickets, but many have now suspended sales. Because I know I renewed mine at early March, because at the time I think the perception was, we locked down for a couple of months and we'll return to some form of normality. That is looking less and less likely. Clubs can take the money, and also, I think we spoke about this for clubs such as Partick Thistle, and I think Tranmere fans, they've rallied around the club and they've said, well, actually, the most important thing to me is that Tranmere Rovers or Partick Thistle or Palace or Brighton, whoever it's going to be, that club is still in existence in 2022.
Yeah.
Am I in a position where I can buy the season ticket? And I'll say this through gritted teeth, I'm not going to get very much back for it, if anything at all. And effectively, it becomes a glorified donation to the club. Now, legally, the club would have to offer that money back if the ruling is that we can't have mass gatherings in realistically what we're looking at mid-September for a start of the season. I think would be the earliest if the Premier League is due to finish on August the 1st. So. At present, clubs can legitimately take cash from fans, though I think they would probably give a caveat at the time. But if they can't offer matches, they would be legally obliged to repay that money once we have sort of a bit more clarity as to where we're going season-wise.
Okay, 2 more questions. The first is from Christophe Lavens. I hope I pronounced that properly, Christophe. Christophe is in Belgium. I wish I was. I love Belgium. There's a little bar in Ghent. It's one of my favourite places in the whole world. Now, Christophe's question, you'll like this, Kieran. It's a proper old-fashioned week 2 of the pod accountancy question. And basically, Christophe said, investors spent about £400 million, as we know, buying 10% of Man City. If you look at the stock exchange value of other clubs, and I feel like, again, I should apologise to Christoph, because I can imagine before our pod he wouldn't have dreamt of looking at the stock exchange value of other clubs. But Christoph's been using lockdown wisely, but he says so. Juventus is worth about £1 billion. Lazio is worth about 90 million. So his question is Man City overvalued, or are those Italian clubs undervalued? Because that's a huge discrepancy, isn't it, between the value of Man City and those clubs?
It is, except they didn't spend 400 million buying 10% of Manchester City. They spent 400 million buying 10% of the City Football Group.
Okay.
And that, of course, owns 8 clubs around the world. Uruguay, Japan, India, Belgium, Australia, New York, and so on. So you are buying far more. The company which did the investment, which is a company called Silver Lake, it's a tech company, and I think it is seeing the cash flows from football, especially those clubs who are regulars in the Premier League, who are regulars as far as the Champions League are concerned. Clearly, this is a bit of a moot point given City for the hearing coming up soon.
Yeah.
They can see the opportunities to generate more cash using technology than the traditional TV, and that's why I think the Amazon experiment is intriguing. So you are getting more than just Manchester City in that particular purchase.
I agree with you, but I think Christoph's still got a part. I mean, they wouldn't, if Man City weren't part of that group, they wouldn't be spending that much money. I mean, Man City is the jewel in that crown, isn't it? And that's where what they're attracted to. I mean, the rest they get kind of as a bonus thrown in, don't they? Maybe New York, but I don't think they'd be that fussed about the club in India or the club in Belgium, will they?
No. I mean, the advantages to City in having these overseas hubs, for want of a better phrase, is that it allows them to park players, to get consistency in terms of training, and things of this nature. You are paying a premium to get a club from the Premier League, though, because the Premier League's TV revenues far exceed those of Italy. So that would have been a contributory factor as well. And with Juventus, Juventus, I think they don't own their stadium in Turin, and the capacity is actually quite low. It's only about 40,000. I could easily be corrected there because it's not really my field. And as far as Lazio being worth £90 million, well, Lazio don't make money,
right?
And again, it's a fairly dilapidated infrastructure you're buying into. Whereas at least with City, they've got world-class training facilities. They've got a stadium which is at 54,000, could go to 60,000 quite easily, and they're pretty much guaranteed a Champions League place.
Do you know what? That talking about Italian football has reminded me of a question I've been meaning to ask you since Pod 1. I thought that it would be a clever, intelligent question to ask somebody I'd never met before while I was gauging what sort of person you were. And I'm still constantly surprised by the sort of person you turned out to be. I know Guy will be listening to this while the 16-year-old intern edits it. So I will put this down for next. I'll ask you about the finances of stadium sharing in Italy, because I thought that was a really clever question at a time when I thought we had 2 weeks of this pod at most. But,
so did I.
Turned out to be surprisingly successful. Our last question comes from Lewis Moore. Now, Lewis Moore is a Middlesbrough fan. I have to say, Lewis, there's always been one thing that bothers me. The missing O in Middlesbrough has bothered me since I was a kid. I could never understand why there's no O between the B and the R, but I was a strange kid. This is an interesting question from a Middlesbrough fan. As Lewis says, we get a lot of positive feedback. So Middlesbrough get a lot of positive feedback about how the club is run, especially the chairman. But do the figures back up these claims compared to other clubs in the Championship? And he's absolutely right about the positive feedback. I think Steve Gibson is probably the most liked club chairman amongst the pundits and commentators. Are always talking about the stability at Middlesbrough and his reluctance to sack managers, sometimes when it's clear to Middlesbrough fans that he should have done. But that's a good question, because to me, they are one of those clubs where I would always go, yeah, good club, well-run club. But am I right, or am I just assuming that?
Well, I've got my Middlesbrough spreadsheet in front of me. This will probably not surprise you. So I've got Middlesbrough for the whole of the last decade, of which they spent 1 year in the Premier League. They had 4 years of parachute payments, and they managed to lose about 400 grand a week for the whole of the decade.
Wow.
So, that's how significant it is, because they'd spent 9 years in the championship, and I think we've established that the championship is sort of this clown car from a financial perspective of a division. They managed to recover, I'd say, about half of that from player sales, but even so, to lose £185 million in a decade is a hell of an achievement. Steve Gibson, I think one of the reasons why he's liked, he's a local lad. He's effectively put in about £170 million into the club itself, and he does this via a company called Gibson O'Neill. So his success is in haulage and things of that nature. Borough loses, and I went into sort of some of the small print, because every year I was looking at Borough's accounts, and I was looking at their tax bill, and they kept having these negative tax bills. And it said that was something down to something called group relief. I googled group relief, and it wasn't quite what I was expecting.
I dread to think.
Okay, blimey! But then I went into the HMRC website and googled group relief there, and that was a bit more what I'd been anticipating. My heart was a fluttering initially. So, Borough loses money, but it's managed to transfer its tax losses in some of the years to the rest of Steve Gibson's, which is sort of acted as a parachute in terms of his commitment. But you can't deny that Steve Gibson has put his heart and soul financially into that club. But it's a very expensive business doing so for anybody who's supporting a club in the championship for any long period of time.
So let me get it straight. So Middlesbrough Football Club are considered just one part of the Gibson O'Neill empire, for want of a better word. It's not considered as a separate entity in its own right. It's just one of his assets. Is that right?
Yeah, Middlesbrough Football Club is effectively owned 100% by Gibson O'Neill. Yeah, and Gibson O'Neill is owned by Steve Gibson and presumably somebody called O'Neill.
Yeah, you'd guess, wouldn't you?
I'm smart.
Those losses are. This is a club who, the decade before, had they won trophies. They were high profile. They were buying big name players, and then suddenly you get a decade of £400,000 a week. Did you say?
Yeah,
that's astonishing. For people who haven't listened to this pod since the start, it's almost impossible to get your head round figures like that and believe that any company is still actually going as a concern, isn't it?
It is, but I think if you take a look at the championship as a whole, we've got these individuals who are literally doing that each Monday morning. The first thing they do is they write out a check for 300, 400, 500 grand.
Wow.
And they do that week in, week out, year in, year out, until they get to the Premier League. And when they get to the Premier League, they get 1 year of profits and they start losing money again.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's slightly depressing. I always try and look for a cheery story to finish. Maybe I should look at the questions a bit more closely before I work out the order of them, says he, pretending that he gets involved until he puts the headphones on. Thank you, Kieran. I always enjoy I enjoy every pod. I count the hours until we can speak to each other again. It's a shame we can't actually see each other, but I think it's now time to reveal to the people at home that we have in fact recorded this naked, the pair of us. It's not an experiment I intend to repeat, especially with the window open and the cat in the mood she's in. This is it's not on the script. I'm improvising now. The Price of Football is an adapted production. If you have questions for our questions pod, and again, if you don't, we're in trouble, but I know you do, because we've got a queue, and they're always very good questions. And don't forget, they can be as specific as you want. So, Palace fans and Middlesbrough fans, I'm not going to try and say specific again, because that seems to have annoyed the cat even more. There's a lot of door banging. Isn't the Baroness in a bad mood in your house this morning?
I think so. Yeah.
I've never been more aware of doors banging in your house. And are you not meant to be podding today? Are you in one of your all-day media things again?
Well, I'm doing a Preston North End podcast in an hour. No, the dog has opened the door to the room in which I record, so it means that all the noises from the rest of the house are coming through.
I've got an angry cat. You've got a dog opening the door and going out again when he sees you're not wearing any clothes. Yes, questions at priceoffootball.com is what I was aiming towards. Thank you for listening. If you're having your 6-person barbecue in your garden tomorrow, and again, it doesn't occur to anybody in this government that not everybody in the country's got a garden, but there you are. Or indeed 6 friends in my case, but that's a different matter. And we'll talk to you again on Thursday. Thanks a lot. Take care now, Kieran. Bye-bye.
Stay safe, stay healthy, boys and girls.
The price of football. The price of football.